The morning Noah Hale walked his father's soybean field and pulled the sprayer nozzle off the tank hose, setting it down in the grass at the end of the row like something he had decided he was finished with. The two men watching from the road did not understand what they were seeing. It was the second week of June in Benton County, Indiana, and the fields on either side of County Road 400 North were in their full summer urgency. The corn was waist-high. The soybeans were pushing through. Every farm in the township was on a schedule, and the schedule in June meant spraying. Herbicides first, then fungicide if the weather turned wet, insecticide if the pressure came in from the south. You sprayed because not spraying was how you lost a crop. That was not an opinion. That was what 40 years of yield data said. Noah Hale was 17 years old. He was 5'10", lean the way farm boys get lean from actual work, and he had been running the Hale Farm's field operations for most of the past 2 growing seasons since his father's back surgery had taken him out of the equipment cab for what the doctors said would be at least a year, and what had turned out to be longer. The farm was 240 acres. Good ground, mostly. A little wet in the north corners, but nothing a normal season couldn't handle. The sprayer sat at the end of the row. Noah walked back toward the barn without looking at it. He did not look at the road either. Frank Dubois, who farmed 800 acres on the east side of the township and had been doing so since before Noah was born, watched from his truck window. He had slowed to check a tile inlet on the road shoulder and had seen the whole thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he rolled his window down and called to his hired man, Dale, who was in the passenger seat. "You see that?" Dale looked. Boy just pulled the nozzle off his sprayer. "I see that," Frank said. They watched Noah disappear into the barn. The sprayer sat where he had left it, tank still half full of mixed chemical. "His daddy know about this?" Dale said. Frank Dubois put the truck back in gear. "Somebody ought to make sure." He did not stop to ask Noah directly. Noah was not a boy you approached that way. He was polite, serious, with the self-containment of a young person handed adult responsibility early and who had handled it without making a production of it. Frank respected that, even if he did not understand what he had just seen. By the time he got to the co-op, the story had gotten there ahead of him. Calvin Mercer, who managed the agronomy desk, had already heard it from 2 other people. Noah Hale pulled his sprayer nozzle, Calvin said when Frank walked in. "I saw it," Frank said. "His field is going to have pressure by August," Calvin said. It was not a prediction delivered with any satisfaction. It was a statement of what the growing season in that part of Indiana did to unsprayed soybeans in a normal year. Aphids from the north. Bean leaf beetles working up from the south. Sudden death syndrome in the wet corners if you did not have fungicide down early. The calendar was not forgiving and it did not make exceptions for philosophical positions. "The boy's going to have a hard lesson," Frank said. Nobody said it with cruelty. They said it the way farmers say things about other farmers' decisions when they can see the outcome coming and cannot do anything about it. You watched. You waited. You did not interfere with another man's ground. Noah Hale's father, James Hale, had farmed Benton County ground his entire adult life. He was 54 years old, lying on a physical therapist's table 3 mornings a week trying to rebuild the disc in his lower spine that had given out the previous October, doing this with the specific frustration of a man who could see his farm from the kitchen window and could not do the work he needed to do on it. What he had not told Frank Dubois or Calvin Mercer or anyone else at the co-op was that the conversation with Noah about the sprayer had happened 4 months earlier, in February in the kitchen, over the seed catalogs and the crop plan for the year. And it had not been an argument. It had been a conversation, careful and long and more complicated than most people would have assumed, because Noah had come to the table with something more than an opinion. He had come with a folder. If you have ever watched someone you love take a risk you could not fully protect them from, and chosen to trust them anyway, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. What James Hale did in that February kitchen is the kind of quiet courage that doesn't make the news, but changes everything that comes after it. The folder had been accumulating since the previous August. Noah had started it after a conversation with a new county extension educator, Dr. Patricia Voss, who had come from a research position at Purdue and ran the kind of farm meetings that drew 20 people instead of 200, but that those 20 talked about for weeks afterward. Noah had gone to one session on soil health and integrated pest management, sat in the back row and said nothing, then stayed 45 minutes afterward asking questions. He had come to all her meetings after that. He had read the papers she recommended, ordered 3 books through the county library, and worked through them in the grain cart cab during harvest and on his phone at night. What the folder contained, when he laid it out on the kitchen table that February evening, was a set of observations about the Hale farm's own fields cross-referenced against 5 years of his father's yield data, and a series of printed research summaries on something called integrated pest management, which was a way of thinking about crop protection that did not start with a spray schedule and work backward from it. The core idea was not complicated. A farm's pest pressure was not a fixed quantity to be suppressed with chemistry on a calendar. It was a dynamic system. A farm that sprayed on a schedule killed not just the target pests, but also the beneficial insects that preyed on them, and by killing both it created a chemical dependency in which pests rebounded faster than beneficials, and the cycle locked in. Noah did not present this as a theory. He showed his father the research, yield comparisons from farms that had reduced chemical inputs and tracked their outcomes, soil biology data from fields where predatory insect populations had recovered. He showed him the economics, which was the part James Hale looked at longest. The economics were not simple in either direction. Cutting chemical costs saved money on inputs. But if pest pressure came and yield dropped, the savings would not cover the loss. The research suggested that in fields with recovering beneficial populations, pest pressure itself was lower, a mechanism that took time to establish, but that, once established, was self-reinforcing. The question was whether you could get through the transition period. Noah had a plan for the transition period. It was on the last page of the folder. It involved scouting the fields twice a week himself, using economic thresholds rather than calendar dates to make spray decisions, and maintaining one rescue spray option if the pressure exceeded the threshold. It was not ideological. It was a managed trial on one farm with a 17-year-old doing the monitoring and his father reviewing the numbers every week from the kitchen table. James Hale had looked at the folder for a long time that February evening. Then he had looked at his son, who was sitting across from him with the expression of a person who has prepared for a conversation carefully and is now waiting to see if the preparation was enough. "You've been working on this since August," James said. "Since August," Noah said. His father was quiet for a while. "If it goes wrong, we lose the crop. If it goes wrong on the one field and I call it, we spray and we save most of it," Noah said. "The trigger is 20 aphids per plant on average. I scout every 4 days. I'll catch it." James Hale looked at the window that faced the fields, the way he had been looking at it all winter from a body that would not do what he needed it to do. His son had been running the farm. His son had been doing it well. And his son had spent 7 months building a case that deserved a serious answer. "The North soybean field," James said. 40 acres. You scout it yourself, and you show me the numbers." "The North soybean field," Noah said. That was February. June came. Noah pulled the nozzle off the sprayer while Frank Dubois watched from the road, and the 40 acres of North soybeans went into their summer without a foliar insecticide application for the first time in the history of the Hale farm. Noah scouted the field every 4 days, the way he had said he would. He walked it in a W pattern, stopping at 20 points per pass, counting insects at each stop and recording in a notebook that began to look, by July, like the kind of systematic record a researcher would keep rather than a teenager would. He found aphids. He found bean leaf beetles. He found, in greater numbers than he had expected, and in numbers that seemed to be growing week by week, something else. He found the things that ate the aphids. Ladybugs, which he had seen in soybean fields before but never in the concentration he was seeing now. Lacewing larvae. Parasitic wasps, which were nearly invisible, a millimeter long, moving through the canopy in numbers you could only estimate, and which did their work inside the aphid bodies in a way that was both precise and, when you understood it, remarkable. The field, unsprayed for the first time, was showing him what it looked like when the biological layer was allowed to function. He did not say anything to anyone about what he was finding. He showed his father the numbers on Thursday evenings at the kitchen table, laying the notebook open and walking through the counts and the trend lines he had been tracking on a piece of graph paper clipped to the back cover. James Hale looked at the numbers without speaking much. He was a man who had processed things by looking at them, and he looked at these the same way he had looked at yield maps and weather forecasts and the terms of the operating loan for 30 years. Beneficials are running ahead of pest pressure, he said one Thursday in mid-July. Since the fourth week of June, Noah said. The ratio has been consistent. His father looked at the graph paper. You're below threshold. 17 days below threshold, Noah said. The field hasn't hit 20 aphids per plant once. James Hale set the notebook down and looked at the window. Outside, the north soybean field was in full canopy, dark green, the rows closed and dense. It looked, from the kitchen, exactly like a field that was doing what a field was supposed to do. Frank Dubois drove past the north field in late July and slowed the truck the way he had slowed in June. The canopy appeared to be in excellent condition for the time of year. He had been watching for signs of the aphid pressure he had expected. The signs were not there. He drove on and came back the following week and looked again. Calvin Mercer saw the field in August, stopped his truck on the shoulder, and looked at the canopy the way an agronomist reads a field. The plant color was right. The canopy architecture was right. If there had been significant pest pressure at any point, it had not left the visual signature he would have expected to see. He noted it and drove on. September came, and with it the beginning of harvest. Noah Hale combined the north soybean field on a Thursday in the third week of September, starting at the east end and working west, watching the yield monitor on the cab display with the attention of a person waiting for a verdict. The field averaged 62 bushels per acre. He sat in the combine cab at the end of the last pass and looked at the monitor for a long time. The Hale Farms north soybean field had averaged 54 bushels per acre over the 5 previous seasons, which was the data in his folder, which was the number he had been carrying in his head since February. The field he had not sprayed had outperformed the field that had been sprayed on schedule for 5 straight years by 8 bushels per acre. He called his father from the cab. James Hale answered on the second ring. 62, Noah said. There was a silence on the line. Per acre, his father said. Per acre. Whole 40. Another silence. Your threshold held. Never hit 20, Noah said. Peaked at 16 in the third week of July and came back down. He could hear his father breathing. Come home when you're done putting the equipment away, James Hale said. I'll have dinner on. Noah put the phone in his pocket and climbed down from the cab into the smell of harvested soybeans and the particular quiet that comes after a combine stops and the field is done. He stood there for a moment looking at the stubble that had been a canopy 3 hours ago. He did not feel triumph. He felt something closer to relief, and behind the relief something more permanent, a settling of something that had been uncertain since February and was now certain in the way that yield data is certain, which is the most certain thing a farmer has. Frank Dubois came the third week of October, knocked on the door, stood on the porch with his cap in his hand, which was not the way he usually stood anywhere. I heard your yield numbers, Frank said. 62 bushels on the north field. Yes, sir, Noah said. You didn't spray it. No, sir. Frank looked past Noah into the house where James Hale had appeared in the kitchen doorway. Your boy got 62 bushels without spraying, Frank said, the way a man says something out loud that he needed to hear himself say. He did, James said. Come in and see the scouting data. Frank sat at the kitchen table and went through the notebook and the graph paper and the research summaries and the final numbers. He asked questions and Noah answered them the same way he had answered his father in February, but with 8 months of field data behind them now. Calvin Mercer came the following week with Dr. Voss, who had heard about the yield results and asked to see the data. She went through the notebook slowly, the way a researcher goes through field records, asking specific questions about sampling methodology and threshold calibration. Noah answered all of them. He had the answers because he had been asking himself the same questions all summer. How long did it take you to build this monitoring protocol? Dr. Voss said. I started in October. After your first meeting. She looked at him, 17 years old, spiral notebook, graph paper, yield data printed on one sheet, running a more rigorous field trial than some of the graduate students she had supervised. Would you be willing to present this at the winter extension meeting? Noah looked at his father. James Hale gave a small nod. Yes, Noah said. The winter meeting drew more people than Calvin Mercer had seen at an extension event in 11 years. Farmers came from 4 counties. Noah stood at the front of the room at the Benton County Fairgrounds with his notebook and his graph paper and walked them through what he had done and what he had found, in the same careful, undefensive way he had explained it to his father in February. He answered most questions from the data. For a few he said he did not know, and that another season would help answer them. The room appreciated this more than it would have appreciated false certainty. By the following spring, 9 farms in Benton County had contacted Dr. Voss about scouting protocols. 3 were Frank Dubois farms. He had called in January before the extension meeting and asked Noah to walk his fields with him in February and help him understand what to watch for. Noah walked Frank Dubois's fields on a cold February morning, explaining what to look for and what it meant when you found it. Frank asked practical questions and wrote the answers in a notebook he pulled from his coat pocket. He had been farming this county for 30 years and was writing things down because a 17-year-old was telling him something he did not know. He did not find this uncomfortable. It was simply what it was, a thing that had been true for years, waiting for someone patient enough to prove it. James Hale watched from the kitchen window that February morning, coffee in hand, back still not right but better. His son was in the frozen field explaining something to a man who had 30 years on him, and the man was writing it down. He had told Noah in October that the north field was his to manage however he thought right for as long as he wanted. Noah had thanked him and gone back outside. James thought about February and the folder on the table, the 7 months Noah had spent building the case before bringing it to the kitchen. He thought about what kind of person does that, who works that long in private, who carries that much uncertainty without letting it become doubt. Outside, Noah was at the field's edge showing Frank something in the soil. Frank was nodding and writing in his notebook. James Hale drank his coffee and watched his son teach a man old enough to be his grandfather something true about the ground they both loved. Whatever came next, he thought, the farm was going to be all right. The land had always known what it needed. It had just been waiting for someone young enough to still believe that what the book said and what the field showed could be the same thing, and patient enough to go find out.